First thing I want to say to all of you is I've talked to so many docents over the years in relationship to just participating in a lot of museum shows in my career, and I always really want to let you guys know how important it is for the museum to have you. You are the educators, you are what draws the community in, you're the one who tells the stories of the artists as you're leading the young people through. So I wanted to let you know how much I appreciate that and what an important role you play in this institution. So claps to you. 2001, I guess. I did a body of work in Minnesota that was a show at the Walker Art Center, and that was the first of the Horizon line, and it was ice houses. And so I went out in the snow with my 8x10 camera, and I started making, you know, what most landscape photographers make, which is horizontal landscapes. Very rarely do you see the landscape shift in relationship to its verticality. So I think this is always something really interesting to talk to people about, is like, how do we normally look at landscape? What is landscape in relationship to how we kind of view it? And so when I was out there on the ice in Minnesota, I just, you know, I was shooting with my 8x10 camera, which is an 8x10 negative, and I just shifted it from horizontal to vertical. And then when you're shooting large format, there's a wonderful ground glass that has a grid on the back of it. So I put that horizon line right in the middle of the grid. And I shot about 10 sheets of film. And when I went back to my studio, the body of work in Minnesota for the Walker took 2.5 months in the winter. I was teaching at Yale at the time, but I would go on the weekends and shoot and be the only person on the plane hoping for a blizzard because I wanted to be white and white. And so it started that making that body of work and realizing what that was to create a continuous horizon line in relationship to it being fractured became a place of language for me. It became a really important place of language that I've continued to explore, from the surfers to this body of work. And then I just did a body of work of my hometown, Lake Erie, of Sandusky, Ohio, for the Cleveland Clinic. So when you walk through the Hillcrest Hospital in Cleveland, you can see it in an episode of Art 21, because Art 21 did an episode of me last year. But you can see that the hospital, I've transformed that corridor of a hospital so that the exterior of what is right there behind them in terms of Lake Erie is then in the interior, and creating kind of an ethereal kind of place for people to be able to be with work. So things that I'm interested in. I mean, the horizon line became very important to me in relationship to, I think, what we all seek in a certain way. Like, I ask myself a lot of questions in relationship to what human beings seek, how we cognitively connect to everything, that we always look out to the horizon in the ocean, that when we're on road trips, we find that horizon line, that it's innately in us as human beings to kind of find this and look at this and wonder upon it. And I don't know if it's because of the fact that it grounds us in some way, that there's something within it that creates a possibility for us to have it being recognized, and it grounds us. But I just think that it's a really important thing to us as people in relationship to how we look at the world. So what I really am interested in too, and when I started doing this as a gesture, was the fact of, and it's something that in February I have a new show at Regan Projects, and I'm asking a lot of questions right now about how our brains work and how we attach to what we think is sublime. Like, what is the sublime, and how do we begin to actually look at it, and how do we dissect that, and how do we enter it, and how does it disappoint us? Because I think that there's an interesting thing, and I'm always in my work really interested in playing around with what is iconic, but it's not necessarily what is like the high end of iconic, but it's about a gesture that makes us think about what is iconic. Sunrises and sunsets are iconic. We all have done them photographically. We all know them. They're not only iconic, they're also cliche. So that's a really interesting question to ask people and to have people talk about, is this notion of this connection of cliche. That again, like that sublime, we want it. We don't actually get really tired of it, but it's an interesting thing again, because how can you actually make serious photographs of sunrises and sunsets? And they were like, congratulations, you've won an award. And I'm like, oh, an award? Okay, I've won an award, great. And they're like, well, in order to have the award, what you need to do is get on a container ship, and you can leave from the port of Long Beach and go to Korea and make a body of work that I need to know what you're going to make. So you have to write us a proposal for you to get this award. Or you can go from the Korea to Long Beach, your choice. And so I was like, oh, very interesting, okay. How did I get nominated for this award, you know? And they were like, well, Catherine Halbrecht at MoMA recommended you because she worked with you at the Walker on your ice houses, and she thought it would be really interesting for you to do, any of artists, that you would be a really interesting artist to decide to accept this award and do this. And so I accepted the award, and I proposed to them because I was really interested in kind of breaking down this cliche and really thinking about what is iconic in relationship to that history of photography. And I proposed that I would do every sunrise and sunset along the journey, knowing that just the parameters and just setting the rules in relationship to that would bring an enormous amount of challenge, because most likely, just like within this body of work, there's weather out at ocean. So you're not necessarily going to get every sunrise and sunset. So it's a way of taking something conceptually, like sunrise and sunset, that is so utterly cliche, and be able to move people through it so it's a relationship of a journey. Now, what I didn't know, because I'd never crossed the ocean before, is how utterly connected in relationship to time-based that this body of work became. And the reason being is I didn't know that when you're on the ship, that you basically set your clock an hour ahead, and then you have 2 days that are the same. You have 2 Thursdays, and then you start setting your clock back. And so the only thing in relationship to my connection, the only connection that I had in relationship to time became the ritual of the sunrise and the sunset. That became my ritual, and it became my clock, and it became like my grounding place in relationship to idea of time, because time became utterly abstract. So I would get up and I would spend from 4:30 to about 8 o'clock or so just slowly watching the light change. And now I photograph the whole time, and one of the things that the kids will really like you to do is to explain that a ship is constantly moving. One of the interesting things about this body of work is it's quiet. It's silent. There is absolutely nothing silent about this ship. It's got this huge giant engine that is just cranking and grinding, you know, and it's like the wind is blowing, and it's just like a very noisy thing. But I love the silence of these, and I think that's one of the things that I love about photography, is that it creates this kind of moment, you know, just that you know, decisive moment, but it also has all this atmosphere and all this quietness. But on the ship, what you can do with the kids, which is really funny, is so here I am with my camera on a tripod, you know, and it's a Hasselblad with a big giant digital back on it. You can't shoot large format film on a ship because I wouldn't be able to line up the horizon. So in my viewfinder, there's a grid, just like the grid that I would have in my 8x10 camera. So I'd sit there on the ship, and it would be like this. You'd go over, and then I would be looking through the viewfinder, and I'd see the line click, and then over that way, and then back up, click, and then over that way. And that is what I would do every morning and every night. And I got really good like thigh muscles from it, because I would be like down like this, almost in a squat, like just constantly moving back and forth. And so the interesting thing is, you know, the fact that I don't digitally make the horizon straight. It actually has to work. And also, even though I'm photographing digitally, there's no hyped up Photoshop colors or anything like that. Like, the file is what the file is. I mean, if you were to look at all the raw files, you would see that there's like no all of a sudden like brightening up this part of the water or whatever. And I'm really interested in photography in that place still from being film based, that even though I've switched everything up in relationship to having to at this point because of the technological advances, I'm still interested in really waiting. And that's another interesting thing that you can talk to people about, because in those 2.5 to 3 hours I'm waiting and I'm watching, you are meditating to a certain extent. And there's something that we forget, I think, and we've lost track of as people in that kind of banality and what that waiting is. Like, I have a 10-year-old son, and we have a house in Three Rivers, and when we go up to Three Rivers, he's not allowed to game in the car. Like, we don't have a little video monitor on our back of our seat, we have nothing. And he's like, but why can't I play with my DS? And I'm like, because you're gonna look out the window. And he's like, but I don't want to look out the window. I want to be on my DS. And I'm like, you can read a book or you can look out a window. It's your choice. Those are your options. And I want him to have that sense that the world does move a little bit slower, you know, that it actually, there's something in relationship to boredom or the banality of things that actually hopefully inspires creativity. And I think we've lost a little bit within the generation of our kids of how to be creative people. Like, how do you end up thinking about things? How do you put things together? And often you just don't have that time. You don't have that space. So the other thing about these bodies of work, of me waiting and watching light and being there with the horizon, is it's become kind of my place of meditation. And I like it. And I find that I actually, you know, keep probably doing water and horizon because I keep wanting, I'm needing to seek that out as a person and as an artist to have that kind of quietness. So the rule was that the sun had to be in the middle. It could be anywhere in the sky in relationship to how I like the light. But so with the first mate, I was always figuring out exactly in terms of latitude and longitude where the sun would be in the middle. Fortunately, 2 times I was able to get the ship in. And that was only because the sun is in the middle. The ship wouldn't have been in there if the sun hadn't shown up in the middle. So they asked, well, why is the ship only in 2 times? The reason being is I had that one rule that the sun just had to be in the middle. So the horizon's in the middle, the sun's in the middle, I'm very symmetrical. I happen to be an incredibly formal artist. I like things tight like that. It's important for me to keep them kind of tight and to have those kind of restrictions. The days that weren't any sunrises and sunsets, I would actually wait still for the most part because the light still slowly shifts, you know, so it's like this blue in an hour can become a different blue. And so I wanted to be able to just still have that moment of waiting. These days, no, it wasn't going to change. I mean, and I think that's so interesting how the sunrise and the sunset look exactly the same. You know, there is no distinction between the two of them. It's just like that's what they are. And so, you know, you just move through the body of work. And then one of the other things that I was talking to you about earlier is this, this kind of idea of a fractured landscape. So by keeping the horizon consistent and by doing it vertically, you then have literally an extension of a landscape, but it's fractured. And that's also, in my mind, kind of a philosophical question that I ask to our own connection to the sublime as people now. Like, how do we get transported? Do we really literally stand at an ocean's edge and watch sun anymore for hours? You know, I don't think most of us do. You know, and so, so the idea of that continuation of the horizon line that carries you all the way through, but these breaks in it, you know, in my mind, bring this question to our own connection and how we are fractured from nature. that we have become so completely fractured from nature. So that's it in a nutshell, and we can talk about the journal pages in the other room if you want to go in there. But one of the things I think that is so fantastic about this show is that literally it's going to be the only place ever that from this photograph you look out and the horizon is continued, and that is just unbelievable, and I'm so lucky that the museum wanted to show this work, because it's like such an amazing thing. And all of the from day in and day out, when you guys come and you're working with everybody here, you'll see that sky changes. These always stay consistent, but it's going to give you kind of a sense of time and a sense of place in a certain way too, in relationship to the installation of the work. Yes?
I'm just curious, what time of year you went, how many hours of daylight were there?
Yeah, it was
this one and this one, how many miles did you go? I mean,
well, you go from Korea to Long Beach. The route is that I saw land when I passed Japan, and I didn't see land again until California. Right. So you're going up and around the Aleutians and back down. And I went in end of August, beginning of September. And the reason being is I teach. And I don't really take sabbaticals. I haven't figured out why I don't do that yet, but too bloody dedicated. But that was the time that they offered. And I would really actually love to see a winter scene. I would love to see seasonally how this body of work would change. We had one huge storm on the journey. Yeah, one just like intense storm. Where the waves became 15 meters and they're just like, blowing up across the ship.
You didn't photograph that, right?
Yeah, I did. Every day I photographed. Yeah, every day. I didn't miss one day. No, I had my rules. But then you'll see if you come to the lecture, which I really encourage you guys to come to the lecture. I'm going to just show all the other photographs that I did on the ship, and it's going to be kind of like a little bit of a performance piece of the journey, So it's very important that this is conceptually rigorous, but because I was on the ship, I took a lot of photographs because that's all I had to do. I played Scrabble and I took photographs, and I ate bad food.
You doodled.
You
doodled.
And I doodled. I made really bad drawings. So, yeah.
The sponsoring company, what was their motivation for doing this?
This is a good question. It's a very interesting new thing in the art world, right? It's very, very interesting. It is basically, corporations have figured out how to get bodies of work out of artists and have a complete tax write-off as a corporation because they're supporting the arts. All right? So they get the first edition of all 22 photographs, and I'll tell you the price, for $50,000. That's not that much money for 22, and that's a complete tax write-off for them. They get the first edition. I have the other editions to sell, but if I was a painter, I wouldn't, obviously. But it is interesting. BMW has done it with me. Hanjin has done it. But I have found that it's a new kind of corporate way of collecting, so that they can say that they're supporting the arts. They can actually get work that will increase hugely in value over the years, and they get to write it all off.
Remember when Hockey did that?
Yeah.
Installation and the
What kind of accommodations did you have?
I had a nice cabin. I was on the officer's deck. So, but it's not like a cruise ship. But I did have like a, not a twin bed, but a double bed. I had this cool little banquette set with a table, and that's where I played Scrabble and did all my drawings and all my journal writing. I had a TV in my room, but there was no TV. But I would look at it. I'd be like, "Hi, television over there." But I took my computer and I downloaded a lot of movies I had, so that at night, if I wanted to have downtime. But at night, I often like to go to the front of the ship and lay on my back and just look at the sky, and it would kind of just rock me. And that's one thing that I'm an insomniac, and one of the nice things about this is I actually slept incredibly well through the whole journey, except for those stormy nights. because it was really loud. I mean, it was bashing. All those containers were going bam, 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 bam. But I was rocked to sleep every night, and I actually kind of like, wow, I need a rock. I need
A rocking bed.
I need a rocking bed. Yeah, Capture One is a great processing. So I shoot everything raw, and then I put my discs in, and I shoot on CD cards, and I put my discs in, and it downloads into Capture One. And then through Capture One, I have to choose what scale I'm printing it at, and then it creates the best file in relationship to that scale. That's why shooting raw is so important. And then you do your, you do your color corrections and things just like I would do in a darkroom. So I basically use the computer exactly like I used the enlarger when I was still printing.
So do you print these yourself?
Yes.
The kids
Well,
are
these
asking
actually are printed. These aren't Epson. Now I have big Epson printers in my studio, but these are all Type C prints because I used to like that better, but now everything's switched where Epson's done a better job than this, and this is going to become obsolete. So everything now in the entire body of work for the Cleveland Clinic is all prints that I made in my studio that are Epson prints.
The kids like that. They asked me, did she print these? I said, no, she went to Costco and no.
Yeah, but I can print this big, and I mean I printed all my bodies of work through the years in a dark room myself up to the ice houses. And the ice houses I stopped printing myself because I was pregnant. And I couldn't be in the dark room and I couldn't be around the chemistry. And then after that I was like, I don't miss this so much, it's okay, and then I switched to digital and then it became different. But no, with my students at UCLA, I teach them how to tray develop black and white sheet film, and I know all of that stuff.
That's the basics.
So I was trained very traditionally as a photographer. I went to San Francisco Art Institute in the 80s for my bachelor's degree, and I went to Cal Arts in the 80s as well, graduated in 88 with my master's degree. So I was trained, like Perkle Jones taught me silver gelatin, black and white printing, and he was Ansel Adams' printer. And so, like I went to art school because I knew from a really early age, the age of 9, that I wanted to be a photographer. And I had my own darkroom that I saved up all my babysitting money for. By the time I was 14, I was very, very serious about it. And art schools just seemed like the thing to do because it's the only thing that I was really, really serious about, and it worked out for me. So, yeah.
Did you ever find always having the horizon disorienting? I went 7 days across the sea, and after a while, 360 degrees, it was a funny feeling.
It's interesting. It is. I always find it as my anchor in a certain way, but because you're on a ship and it's moving all the time, it does get a little disorienting. It does. I mean, I felt very disoriented, not in relationship to more to time and more to really missing land.
Yeah.
Like all of a sudden I was like halfway into it and going like I actually need to see some land now. Like it's just water everywhere. And it was like, that was interesting. Like I didn't think I would have the anxiety or the desire to actually want to be back on land. So.
And then when you did get on land, did you have?
Oh, I was good. I moved in my bed. Like my bed was still moving when I would go to sleep, and I'd wake up like jerking myself up because I think I was. Yeah, it was just all very disorienting.
I was interested in your quote that's listed here. It says you're very interested in the language of photography in relation to painting.
Yeah.
And can you expand on that?
Yeah, no, I can. I mean, there's that's a whole lecture in itself, but I think that one of the things is that early on, my influence to art was painting. I would go to the Toledo Art Museum all the time. My father owned an arts and crafts company, so I grew up with art around me all the time. My uncle is a painter, my aunt's a sculptor, my other uncle is the major historian on Middle Eastern tribal rugs. So creativity was always around me when I was a kid. And I realized that in making the ice houses and wanting the white on white, that even though I'm really interested in photography being placed in relationship to the importance of a document, that photography is a document, that I could also begin to play with it in terms of some of the things I get around abstract painting or field painting. So I was thinking about Ryman a lot with those white houses, because the white on white, and especially the days that I would shoot, it would be more and more of a blizzard, and those would just begin to disappear, kind of like this one that becomes all fog. It becomes a field of color, and it becomes abstract, even though it is in relationship to something that is still there and real. It's not, you know, it's not paint, it's photography. And then the other thing that's really interesting to me in my life as an artist is, I would say that half the people that come to my museum shows and other shows come up to me and they tell me what a great painter I am. So it's really weird. I constantly am told, like, I really like your paintings, and I'm constantly saying, they're photographs. But with the early
I see
portraits,
your color field abstractness right there.
Yeah.
That really, my first response to that was that.
Yeah.
That
so that's the connection to painting. And then I'm, you know, one of the things that I'm very tied into is more in relationship to 16th, 17th century painting, in relationship to it being the document of that time period. So when I'm doing portraits, I'm lighting like old master paintings. I'm like talking about Holbein and kind of the influence of what Holbein has had on me. So painting has just hugely influenced me, and I'm married to a painter. So I'm constantly in her studio looking at her work and being kind of just, you know, I like the gooiness of it. And I probably, somewhere in me, I'm a frustrated painter, but you can see my drawings are really quite bad, so I'm much better.
In the highway series, in the bridges.
Yeah, the little freeway that's in the way.
Which paintings would you?
Well, Via Salmons.
Okay.
I mean, that, you know, Via didn't do freeways in that way, but
No,
I
but
chose platinum printing because I wanted it to almost be like graphite on paper.
That makes sense.
So yeah, so I really think that she's just an extraordinary artist, and I think that it's so interesting how many painters are influenced by photographers, and vice versa, photographers are influenced by paintings. And I'm really looking for that one day, for that big historical show that the Met or somebody decides to do, of all the relationships between those two mediums over kind of the history of art. From, especially now that so much photography is being done in relationship to the new abstraction. Like, you know, that, and it's really interesting to me because, I mean, I'm obviously, you know, I could go into for a long lecture on this being a professor, but I'm teaching a class right now called Fragmentation. For my advanced photo students, and it is in relationship to this fracturing that's happening within the history of photography to new abstraction, to analog-based, you know, photograms that are basically abstractions, like James Welling's work, Walid Beshti's work. You know, you can kind of name a whole bunch of photographers that are working in that way right now. And I'm just really curious because it happened at the same time in relationship to painting with the invention of photography, right? It's like no longer did the painting have to depict or document that history. And so I think with the kind of crisis of the analog and the digital, there's been this whole kind of creativity in relationship to wanting to take photography away from the document. And I think that that's just something that I'm thinking about and I'm looking at, and I find it really interesting in relationship to the history of painting as well.
You do a lot of thinking.
I spend a lot of time staring at horizon lines. It allows me to think a lot. So.
Were you going to go in the next one?
Yeah, let's go to the next one.
Clouds are so incredible yesterday. Getting too much of that. That's okay.
It's always the kind of magenta cranes. So if you just look right there, that's actually this court that's on Gin. So, and you see that hillside? That's the hillside right there. So that's coming in right where those red lifts are. That's literally the port that I was photographing. And you can, you know, obviously see the exact same hill.
Now, how long ago did you do this?
This was, what, 2 years ago?
2 years.
I don't know. I can't keep track of my life.
How did you guys?
10 days.
10 days.
10 days.
Did Ron hear about this, or did you contact Ron, or how did we
Ron
get?
saw the show at the ICA in Boston, and then he knew that he wanted to do it. And that show was very different. Because you'll see the catalog below, but that show was specifically curated by Helen Molesworth in relationship to the seascapes surrounded the exhibition of these teas that were built of all the political work that I had been doing in relationship to these groups like Tea Party, Boy Scouts of America, Women's Music Festival. And so so she wanted to really kind of, and it's a great essay in the catalog. I mean, Helen is just one of the most brilliant young curators I've ever worked with. I can't say how incredible she is as a thinker of putting things together. Because I am one of these artists that is actually very tight. I don't allow things to get mixed up very often. I don't know if any of you had the opportunity to see my Guggenheim show, but it was very tight, right? It's very tight. I don't all of a sudden put freeways with portraits. I tend to categorize, and I tend to like what I'm working on in relationship to my categories to be concisely together at that moment, because that's what I'm thinking about. But what she did was she was like, did a studio visit, and this was actually the show that was at the ICA. I was this close to being the artist to represent America in the Venice Biennale, to have the American Pavilion. So it went to a younger team artist, but it was basically between us in the finals. And that was the show that we had proposed to do in the American Pavilion, where at the time, so much was being talked about in relationship to even the conflict of democracy within our country, which obviously is still a huge conversation we're having. But to put those kind of groups together with the idea of the spans of the ocean and the fact that everything is, it's all back and forth. We are global. So it's like this became like kind of the quietness of everything, while all of these different fractured groups were in the middle of the exhibition. And it was a really brilliant show. So Ron went and saw it and said, I want to try to get this work for the seascapes for here. So the journal pages. So one of the things that I'm very excited about is this is the first time that they've ever done. And what happened was I made them on the ship. I made the paper before I got on the ship, knowing that I wanted this to be a part of it. So I literally asked Hanjin if I could use their logo. I did the sheets of paper. It was going to be my whole thing that I could do at night, like the captain at sea writing a ship log, and just really wanted that kind of thing. And I actually really like to draw and make cartoons, but I am very much of a closet. I also make little ceramic stumps. It's my thing that I do. That's my private little art practice. And so when I came home and I was getting ready to do this show at Regan, I showed her the ship log and I showed her the drawings, and she was like, yeah, we're just going to do the photographs. So when I came in and I was exploring the museum to do this installation, and this whole area was over here, at first I said to them, I was like, well, I could look at your collection and try to place work that has a relationship to the port from the collection. And then I'm looking at it more and I was like, you know what? I have these drawings in the ship log, and that would work perfectly over there. And so it really ties everything together, and I think it's actually really important for even the kids to have a sense of that you can go from the photograph to the drawing to the ship log, and all of it is in relationship to an idea of representation. And what is representation in our life, and how does it evoke our memory? And I think one of the biggest reasons why I've chosen to be a photographer is not because I have a bad memory, I do at times, but because it has allowed me to be very, very close to my history and what I'm thinking throughout my life. And all these various bodies of work completely connect me right back to these different moments in my life, even from when I was 9 years old making pictures, of what that is to have a tie to us, and a lot of us journal, or a lot of us just like have scraps of paper or books that, you know, you pull off the shelf. You remember when you read that great novel. And but I think it's really, we want to be anchored as human beings. History is incredibly important to us, and so photography has always allowed me to really be cemented in it in terms of that practice of it being about my thoughts. It's nice. It was actually nice to pull them out again and realize all of these things again, like history, that I had forgotten about in the journal by, you know, by reading again. I was like, oh yeah, I forgot that I was feeling that way, or I forgot like all of this. So they wouldn't tell me anything because none of them have ever been on the ship. They own the shipping company, but they've never been on a ship. So I would say, is it dirty? And they would be like, oh yes, it's very dirty. And so that's when I came up with the coverall uniform, right? Because the whole uniform, and why I think there's a picture of me over there in it, is like I decided to, I think also the journals and the drawings became an extension of the whole journey as being almost like a performance. You know, and it became very performative. So I had my outfit that I got into every day. I had like 3 sets of coveralls. I had my Hanjin artist hat, you know, because the ship was going to be so dirty. I thought, well, I don't want to get my nice jeans messed up, you know, so I better have a coverall. But it ended up feeling like right, because it's like I had a uniform, I had a job, it was a performance, I got to, you know, but the ship wasn't dirty, I didn't need coveralls at all. And at first you're thinking the captain's table from Love Boat, you know? Like that's your reference point, you're like, yeah, the captain's table from Love Boat. How far is the horizon? And he goes, well, how far do you think it is? And I'm like, I don't know, 100 miles? Like, I don't know. And he goes, well, let me show you. And he did all the mathematical equations of the height of the ship. And he goes, we're 12 miles. And I was like, wow. And the other beautiful thing of that is to get kids and people to think about that metaphorically. That you never get to it. It's always there. It's always 12 miles. But you don't obtain it. You know, there's no actually, like, you can get to the ports. You can obtain this, like, moment where you get to the ports, and then there is no more 12 miles to the horizon. But on the journey, to think that it's just 12 miles to the horizon the whole time, but it's always just this consistent thing. And I thought that was such a beautiful metaphor. And then as soon as he said that to me, I was like, that's the title of the body of work. So, everything about being a photographer is being in the moment and trying to capture that moment, but then when you go home to edit that body of work, you don't know exactly what's going to work until you start putting all the work together. So you might have, like, you know, 1,500 to 2,000 pictures that you're editing down to 22, because all of a sudden you want maybe a little bit of a different gesture, you're constantly looking. So I'm always telling my students that, yeah, maybe that one shot is what you see and it's the shot, but you should also step this way, you should also step forward. You should be looking at it from different angles, because when you're building a body of work, you need to be able to have a little bit more choice in terms of how you want that body of work to work.
Do you have series there as one, or do you normally do the series?
I always work within bodies of work. So, yeah.
Catherine, I'd like to thank you so much for
Sure.
coming. It was absolutely we all know a whole lot more about photography and how to think about it, and amazing body of work, and I think you're an amazing artist.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Absolutely fantastic.
Thank you.
I'm not that good.
But I'm a painter, but I want to paint all these, you know. And this is so great. Tomorrow will be my first charity